By the mid-1880s, the growing reputation of the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, in London had stirred intellectual interest across the Atlantic. In 1885, a formal extension of this effort took root in the United States with the founding of the American Society for Psychical Research, ASPR, in Boston. This wasn't a fringe movement. Its founding members included some of the most respected thinkers of the time. Chief among them was William James, 1842 to 1910, the father of American psychology and one of the most original minds in modern philosophy. At the time of the ASPR's founding, William James was already a well-regarded psychologist and philosopher, teaching at Harvard. He had published foundational work in empirical psychology, but was also known for pushing the boundaries of scientific orthodoxy. James was deeply influenced by pragmatism, the idea that truth should be evaluated by its practical effects, not just abstract logic. This made him unusually receptive to claims that conventional science dismissed. He didn't believe easily, but he believed in inquiry. He argued that science should investigate all experiences, even if they were bizarre, rare, or culturally taboo. William James believed, to be radical, an empiricist must not only admit experience in all its forms, but also insist upon it. This philosophical orientation led him naturally toward the psychical. In his view, consciousness was likely deeper and more complex than materialism allowed. He suspected that hidden capacities of the mind, possibly connected to a broader metaphysical reality, were not only real, but vital to understanding the self. One of the ASPR's earliest and most important cases was that of Mrs. Leonora E. Piper, 1857 to 1950, a Boston housewife who began exhibiting trance mediumship in the early 1880s. After her father's death, Piper claimed she could enter altered states in which she became a mouthpiece for a spirit control, who relayed messages from the dead. William James personally investigated Piper over many years. He was impressed not because she always succeeded, but because under rigorous observation and control, she produced information she seemingly could not have known, including private details about deceased individuals that hadn't been published or leaked. James wrote, "I am persuaded of the medium's honesty and veracity, and of the genuineness of her trance state. I regard her as the one medium who has not yet been disposed of either by fraud or self-deception." Even when James couldn't conclusively prove that spirits were real, he insisted that the data warranted serious attention, not dogmatic dismissal. The ASPR, under the influence of James and others like G. Stanley Hall, James Hyslop, and later J.B. Rhine, established some of the earliest American efforts at controlled experimentation in psychical research. They developed blind protocols for mediumship sessions, introduced independent verification of facts obtained through mediums, differentiated between hot reading, prior knowledge, and anomalous cognition, emphasized the role of subconscious processes, a precursor to later psychoanalytic theory. This period also marked a tension between survivalist theories, i.e., survival of the soul, and subliminal self-theories, where supposed spirit communication was reinterpreted as unconscious mental activity. James leaned toward the latter, but remained open to both. The founding of the ASPR wasn't just a replication of the SPR. It was an Americanization of parapsychology, infused with the pragmatism, experimental rigor, and spiritual pluralism of the New World. In fact, the ASPR became a critical testing ground for the philosophical boundaries of psychology itself. Could psychology include the mystical without becoming mystical? Could anomalous experiences be studied without invoking supernaturalism? Could consciousness exist beyond individual brains? These questions would ripple into James's later works, especially The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902, and laid the groundwork for transpersonal psychology, consciousness studies, and the mind-body problem in modern philosophy. Although the ASPR eventually merged with and separated again from the SPR several times, its early decades created a space where serious thinkers could examine the impossible with intellectual dignity. While many mainstream psychologists dismissed psychical research, the methodologies developed at the ASPR would influence both psychology and parapsychology for decades. Its archives remain a goldmine of case studies, from trance communications to apparitional experiences, many of which are still discussed today. William James, reflecting on his years with the ASPR, said, "No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded." By the 1930s, the scientific study of the paranormal underwent a major transformation. What began in Victorian parlours and philosophical debates now moved into the experimental laboratory. The figure most responsible for this shift was Joseph Banks Rhine, 1895 to 1980, at Duke University in North Carolina. Rhine, originally trained in biology and influenced by William McDougall's interest in psychical research, founded what became the Parapsychology Laboratory at Duke in the early 1930s. Unlike the earlier Society for Psychical Research, which often dealt with complex case studies and mediumship, Rhine sought to quantify paranormal abilities, especially ESP, extrasensory perception, and psychokinesis, PK. To do this, Rhine developed standardized testing methods for ESP, introduced Zener cards, a deck of 25 cards marked with 5 different symbols: circle, cross, waves, square, star, to test telepathy and clairvoyance. Applied statistical analysis to evaluate whether observed outcomes significantly deviated from chance. Emphasize replication and controlled settings, making the study of parapsychology more methodologically rigorous. Rhine's most famous results involved guessing Zener cards under blind conditions, with some subjects achieving statistically significant scores far beyond chance. Rhine rebranded Psychical Research. Instead of focusing on spirits, seances, or the afterlife, he shifted the spotlight to anomalous cognition and psychophysical interactions. ESP, extrasensory perception, included telepathy mind to mind, clairvoyance, knowledge of unseen objects, and precognition, foreknowledge of future events. Psychokinesis, PK, the ability to affect physical systems, e.g., dice throws, with the mind alone. This move was strategic. It distanced the field from spiritualism and occultism, allowing it to exist within the boundaries of university psychology departments, at least temporarily. Despite some intriguing results, Rhine's work faced significant scientific and philosophical scrutiny. A major philosophical critique came from Karl Popper, who argued that parapsychological claims often lacked falsifiability, a core principle of scientific methodology. According to Popper, if a hypothesis can't be disproven even in principle, it doesn't belong in science. ESP was particularly vulnerable to this critique because experimenters could always propose unknown variables, e.g., psi missing or unconscious bias, to explain away failures. Though Rhine's early studies suggested positive effects, replication proved difficult. Follow-up studies often yielded weaker results or no effect at all. Critics argued that subtle experimental flaws, e.g., sensory leakage or confirmation bias, may have skewed results. Poor statistical methods or optional stopping inflated significance. Rhine's defenders countered that subtle psychological abilities might be fragile and variable. Psi phenomena could behave differently than ordinary physical processes, prompting the concept of psi as elusive or non-local. By the 1970s, the scientific tide had turned against parapsychology. The founding of CSICOP, Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, now CSI, in 1906, marked a new era of organized skepticism. Led by figures like Paul Kurtz, James Randi, and Carl Sagan, CSICOP aimed to expose fraudulent claims and pseudoscience, uphold scientific skepticism and critical thinking, challenge the legitimacy of parapsychological research. They argued that no parapsychological effect had ever been reliably demonstrated under rigorous, independent scrutiny. Claims of psi often thrived in ambiguity, not clarity. Skeptics also emphasized the role of cold reading, confirmation bias, and cognitive fallacies in explaining apparent psychic experiences. Despite criticism, Rhine's efforts legitimized parapsychology for a time. He launched the Journal of Parapsychology in 1937, helped establish the Parapsychological Association, which was accepted as an affiliate of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, in 1969. However, by the late 20th century, most university labs closed or distanced themselves from psi research. Parapsychology became institutionally marginalized, even as private and fringe labs, like the Pear Lab at Princeton, or government programs like Stargate, CIA, continued investigations into remote viewing and mind-matter interaction. Rhine's work transformed parapsychology into a measurable, testable science, at least in aspiration. It helped establish core concepts and methods that still underpin modern psi research, but it also deepened the divide between believers and skeptics. His legacy is twofold. He created the first sustained program for scientific parapsychology. He inadvertently provoked a scientific backlash that continues to shape public and academic attitudes toward the paranormal.